Hello and welcome back to the One Shot Show, where GMs go to level up. There are extra levels to be gained with this particular episode. This is a companion piece to a deep dive we did in our bonus episodes. Now, you aren't missing anything inherently if you haven't listened to that. I'm just saying there's more to be gained here. Today we are talking about a concept I love. It's called Dungeons as Puzzles. It's basically contextualizing the idea of a dungeon crawl or dungeon design in the context of designing it as though it were a puzzle. There is a very, very easy framework that I can throw out here. Once you understand it, you should be able to apply it in your own right and come up with your own. And the case study I use for it is Portal. Now, before we go any further, there is another term that I want to define here. That is called the holistic dungeon. Now, there are a few different grades of dungeon as far as I'm concerned. There's Babby's first dungeon, which is I need to create this kind of sequence. You understand instinctively that this is something that you want to have in your game. So you have some rooms with some enemies and some skeletons and crypts and whatever. And you make that dungeon. And then, your players fight through it. And woohoo, wonderful. And maybe there's a slightly bigger fight at the end. Great. Then there's the sort of next step up as you get a bit more experience, where you're maybe going to want something that's a bit more thematically cohesive. So this is... We're fighting through an underground crypt to recover an artifact from a fallen soldier that was buried here. And there's going to be a couple of traps to dissuade grave robbers. There's going to be some reanimated corpses of soldiers, his honor guard that were buried with him and have been reanimated by some kind of necromantic magic suffusing the area. There's going to be a boss fight. There's going to be the fallen soldier. You can see how this all ties very neatly thematically into a singular concept, a singular idea. I like to call this the 9 to 5 dungeon, right? This is the backbone of your games. This is the hardest working dungeon in Dungeons and Dragons. In my opinion, 90% of dungeons ought to be this, right? Having that thematic through line is what often elevates them and makes them more satisfying. But there is yet another layer that you can go. It is a bit more complicated and a bit more work, and I don't think it should be used for every single dungeon. I call it the holistic dungeon. This is where the entirety of the dungeon is tied to a single concept, not just a thematic through line, but a single, often mechanical concept. Here is an example. In the game Portal, you pick up the portal gun, and every single problem gets solved with the portal gun, right? If we enter a dungeon, the dungeon needs to introduce us to a kind of mechanic, and then we use that mechanic to resolve every single problem in the dungeon.
Very cool.
I will give a framework example. Let's say you have a dungeon. The thematic through line is this is the Temple of the Four Seasons. And every 5 minutes, the season changes. You set a timer, the season changes every 5 minutes. And in different seasons, different rooms have slightly different properties. Different enemies behave in slightly different ways. And if you give the players some control over the shifting of the seasons, then they may have puzzles that they need to solve or problems that they need to solve within the dungeon that they solve by actively changing the seasons, such as this enemy is weak to fire when it is winter and weak to ice when it is summer, and none of your party has ice magic. You've got a lot of fire magic. You wait to go into that room until it is winter, and you can use your fire magic.
Cool.
Am I making any sense to you, Patty? You haven't spoken much yet.
No. I've been absorbing. It sounds cool. It definitely sounds... It fills a niche sometimes that I feel... Like, I love the idea of these sorts of dungeons as, like, being, like, really particular special dungeons to, like, a region. Maybe it's one that you'll revisit at a different time. It also reminds me, in the super secret version of this, you talked about a puzzle where augury was a really useful spell for it, but the idea potentially of like one spell or like one ability or one thing being like your portal gun for this particular dungeon, that's really, really cool.
And you can very easily do that. If the theme of the dungeon is it's like an old proving grounds for pyromancers, then all your fire spells are going to have specific applications.
Yeah.
And then there may even be a combat in there that is a bunch of enemies that are immune to fire magic, that is teaching the lesson of sometimes you can't always get out of it with, you can't always damage it with fire magic, but the fire can do other things. It can melt a pillar that brings down the roof and things like that. But again, it's bringing it back to a singular mechanical idea, not just a thematic idea, but a mechanical concept. I'll give another example. This is one that I have even done some other detailed write-ups on. This is a dungeon called the Grave of the Lantern Keeper, and the entire concept was there was a lantern that could emit different colors of light. It started off with only one color, and they got the extra colors added to it as they went on.
Cool.
And in each room there were things that would change depending on the light available. So, for example, one of the puzzles they have, it was a real simple, here's an uncrossable bottomless pit. When we're emitting blue light, you can see these tiles. You can see these visible spots on the floor. When you're emitting red light, you can see these ones. When you're emitting green light, you can see these ones. And my players had to piece together the safe path by checking the different tiles that were available and seeing how they could all connect together potentially. You can have ones where things are weak to certain magic, depending on it. The way this one particularly worked, we were running in Pathfinder 2nd Edition, where magic is split into 4 traditions. You have arcane magic, divine magic, primal magic, and occult magic, which I, by the way, asterisks on that. Add occult magic to your D&D games from a thematic standpoint. It covers the stuff that warlocks and bards can do. Very satisfying.
Cool. I love that. Can you say those 4 schools again?
Arcane, Divine, Primal, which are in 5th edition.
Yeah.
They're just under the hood.
Yeah.
So Divine magic is clerics, Arcane magic is wizards,
Primal is your
magic
rangers and
is druids. And then, the Ranger is the Primal halfcaster, the Paladin is the Divine halfcaster, and there's not really a proper arcane halfcaster. That's sort of the niche that a magus would normally fit, but there are some 1/3 casters like the Arcane Trickster, the Eldritch Knight. But then Pathfinder 2nd Edition adds occult magic.
Yeah, that's beautiful.
So the way it worked was when each was tied to a certain color of this lantern, and when that lantern's color was being, when that color was being emitted, that magical tradition was suppressed. And you had to have a color active at any given time. So there was one room where there was enemies that were like will-o-wisps, but with colored lights, swamp lights, and they would change the light they were each round, and you could only target them when you had the room lit up to the same color as them, which meant that on any given round there was a kind of magic that simply didn't work, and that meant the bard had to pull out a crossbow sometimes, and it was very interesting.
That's right.
Also, in this instance, it took a hand. To actually hold the lantern. Somebody always had to be holding it. And an interact action was required to change the color that it was emitting.
Oh, fun.
So you might want to give it to somebody who, wanted to attack or, cast a 2-action spell, and then 3rd action, I'll change the color of the lantern.
This feels like a great model for a dungeon. If you have a table that is like all over these things. I know you run a very puzzly, beautiful game, but I also go a dungeon like this could be a great way to start to introduce newer players to start thinking about the game in a different way, or their approach in a different way. For example, you go there, if it takes a particular type of action to be passing this around, it would get people to consider what's on their sheets in a very different way, or how they approach their economy in a very different way.
Yeah. It's really neat for that, absolutely. But the main kind of thing that is key here is they walk into the dungeon, they get a lantern. And when I designed it outward from that simple mechanical concept. That was my portal gun. And I mean, off that framework, Patty, what does that do in your brain? Did the juices get flowing for you? Can you imagine a holistic dungeon, a dungeon that imagines itself as a large interconnected puzzle in its own right?
Yeah, absolutely. It makes me think of... I was actually... So in my design of... I ran the Dungeons of Drakenheim campaign as a West Marchers, and I picked up on this thing that then I ran with for a little bit that I think fits into this, which is that every religious shrine, because there is a religion of the sacred flame, but I picked up on all of the religious shrines are a type of puzzle dungeon, and they're all related somehow to the manipulation or the carrying through of light being the core theme. And so I took that and I ran with it. I think there are 2 dungeons in the book that are written that way. But then I designed a couple more with that same idea, so that again, when my players arrived, they were kind of like, we've encountered Chapels of the Sacred Flame before. We know that there is a puzzle element, and we know it's going to revolve somehow around a usage of light, be it in some part of our kete and how we use it.
One of the sort of half-cast versions of this is the sort of dungeon that you might find in a lot of Legend of Zelda games, where you come into the dungeon. Through the first half of the dungeon, you're exploring it as it is, and at about the halfway point, you find an item. Now, the way I approach this particular kind of dungeon, the sort of one that I've been describing so far, the holistic dungeon, it's like if you got that item straight away at the start. But you can do it at that halfway mark, because what that does in those games is it now reimagines the dungeon in the context of the new thing you have.
Yeah.
A version of that I did one time, this was called the Scrivener's Crypt. It was actually in the same campaign as the Grave of the Lantern Keeper. It was there were like 6 of these beings all buried variously that they had to. There was a whole plot line and everything. We didn't finish that campaign, which is a shame because I had some banging dungeons designed. Anyway, Scrivener's Crypt. They come into the dungeon. They're navigating through it. There was this cipher that they had to solve before they could access it. Real basic cipher, a substitution cipher that my players absolutely ate up because, as you've mentioned, they're quite puzzly people. And as they're going through, it's the dungeon. Each room is a hexagon, and there's an entrance and an exit, and there's some sort of arches that seem to lead to nowhere. They just butt straight up against a wall. And as they're exploring, I sort of add the next tile as they're moving into the next room, and there's walls and things. It's we're looking at a top-down diagram of a dungeon that's slowly expanding as they go. And then they've mapped out this huge chunk. It is now this full honeycomb shape. And they enter into a room. This is now the halfway point of the dungeon. And I go, you see in the center of the room a control panel. And on the control panel is this. And I gesture at the table with all of the dungeon rooms. And that is when they realize that the walls in the rooms actually create the shapes of sigils that they have seen elsewhere, they physically rearrange the whole dungeon to create a new layout, utilizing some of those doors to nowhere that they'd seen previously that now connect to other rooms that they've passed through. So they go back through the rooms the same rooms, but in a different order now, and it allows them to access the second half of the dungeon.
Cool. You've got to publish that. Have you published that?
I intended to at one point.
Yeah, you should.
It's very complex is the problem. Like from a material standpoint, there's some 30 rooms in that you have to actually sort of print and cut and make and everything.
But what a delight for your players to then see the texture of this map that can then be reinterpreted in a completely different way. So funny. Have you ever played have you heard of White Plume Mountain?
I've heard of.
Yeah, so White Plume Mountain, I played through. It's kind of like you know that every room is going to be its own puzzle unto itself, a little like this. That one's more fun. It's a funhouse dungeon. It's like a full madhouse dungeon. It's like there is no connective tissue, and it is like it's a little more. It's not as like tight as you arrive and there's a lantern, but as a player, like when you arrive into every new room of the dungeon, that there will be something like that you are going to be chasing or cooking for.
That's one of the things that kind of led me to this idea is actually exactly that. When you're doing the classic 5-room dungeon and one of the rooms is a puzzle, I love that puzzle room. A lot of what we were talking about in the bonus episode on puzzle design is how to design the puzzle for that puzzle room in your 5-room dungeon. But the thing that always used to frustrate me is like we'd spend all this time learning the mechanics of this puzzle and trying things out, and we'd finally get the solution and we'd get it right as we had this really robust understanding of the puzzle, and then we would never revisit any of those skills or that knowledge again. You wouldn't have a second puzzle that iterated on the ideas of the first one, like what you actually get in the vast majority of puzzle games.
Yes.
And I thought that was a huge missed opportunity.
Yeah. Makes me think I think that when you talk about Zelda, it's more in the newer series of games like the Tears of the Kingdom, Breath of the Wild. You know that when you enter a shrine, exactly it's
going to be one and done, self-contained.
It is a holistic dungeon. You know it, and you're going to figure it out, and you're going to enjoy it.
But I'll be honest, that's actually one of the reasons I bounced off that game. Is I like then having to go into a second room and a third room and a fourth room and fight a boss using the new understanding of this puzzle mechanic or this item or this weapon or what have you. I was like every time I sort of got my head around it, I wanted to sink my teeth further in, and there was nothing. It was like those like the fake fruit in the fruit bowl. Like, if you bite into an apple, there's the juicy flesh underneath. If you bite into a plastic apple, and there's nothing, it's just air inside. That's how Breath of the Wild felt to me. And look, it's a really good game. This is sidetracking into Breath of the Wild. It's a really good game.
It's a wonderful time.
But yeah, I bounced hard off it, and it's because it never delivered the dungeon experience that I crave. And I crave it so bad, I put it in my home games.
You've talked before. I would buy the Matt Carroll holistic dungeons book. That's really it's interesting because like it also a lot of publications will go like you can plug this in anywhere, and I go like not really. Like I need to establish undead in my world in a particular way in order to plug this in.
Yeah.
Or I don't have elementals in my game. I need to do something else. Whereas this sounds like something that a lot of gamers at the table, I think, would immediately recognize and enjoy totally different experience at the table.
Yeah.
It would be like having a totally different like encounter or different mode in the game. Because they say in 5e you've got social exploration, combat.
And
where are those pillars? Where are those pillars? Where are those pillars? But I go puzzling is also such a huge part of like why we come around a table together to play a game.
Exactly. And again, not to bang on it, but that's why we spent a whole, 35 minutes or whatever it was in a bonus episode actually unpacking puzzle design, why we like having it in our games, how to get better at it, all of that good stuff. And I hope that this has actually helped to give you a useful fundamental framework for introducing a kind of puzzle in your game. It is the dungeon as puzzle. By God, you better have leveled up after that episode of the One Shot Show, and we will see you in the next one. If you're enjoying listening to the One Shot Show, why not support us on Patreon? Go to patreon.com/OneShotShow, where you'll be able to find video versions of our episodes, long-form bonus episodes that we release every single month, access to our community Discord server. You can pose questions for our special Q&A episodes, and if you're back at the higher tiers, you can even vote on what questions we cover in our show. Check it out.